We are very excited to have created the new online archive of the boys. This is by far the largest single source of information about this unique group of orphans who survived the Holocaust and were brought to Britain after the war. For over 2 years, and through the COVID-19 pandemic no less, we've built this sizable archive. We're doing this because as time has passed, we've been losing the opportunity to hear from the boys in person. It's therefore all the more important to have the ability to tell their stories for future generations.
The boys' stories are so many different things. They're stories of survival, they're stories of immigrants, of immigration, of starting a new life, of cultural shock, cultural differences, cultural integration. They're also just stories of young people trying to have fun, meeting new people, making new friends, starting a life, starting new jobs, learning new languages, all of which we and people my age still do today.
These people that survived, the boys, their stories don't end with the fact that the Holocaust happened. They're more than just Holocaust survivors. They created a family, they established themselves in a country that they knew nobody in, where they didn't speak the language. And so ultimately it's a story of resilience and perseverance, and I think that it's incredibly important to kind of share that because people can learn from it.
For me it's not a story, it's not a sad story when you talk about the Holocaust, besides in all the obvious ways, but it's also like a celebration of people who survived and their friendships and connections, and looking at people across their whole lives. Obviously this horrific, traumatic thing happened and it's touched all of our lives, especially as descendants of survivors, but there's so much light and happiness and celebration within all these stories and things that have happened to the boys since they survived.
We hope the online archive will be useful to many people, from educators to historians, from academics to archivists, and indeed anyone who has an interest in learning about the remarkable stories of the boys.
For me, I think what's the most exciting kind of group of people who I think will really benefit from this are people who may be children or grandchildren, great-grandchildren of survivors, relatives of survivors, but really not know much about those survivors' stories. And through the website, we'll be able to discover not only more about their survivor's story, but the birthplace of that survivor, the other survivors that came from there too, and begin to draw connections. And again, this is something that has already happened. People who didn't even know that their survivor relative was one of the boys has discovered that through coming across our website. So it was really, really exciting, and I think a lot of people can benefit from using this wonderful resource.
It's very poignant that many of the researchers are themselves descendants of survivors or have been touched by the Holocaust in one way or another.
I think not many people can say that they were able to be the first to sort of tell a piece of history, also from such close proximity and such relations to the stories themselves. I think it's really special that we've been able to do this.
Yeah. This project's been an amazing proof that we can actually all contribute towards this legacy and actually uncover new parts of the stories of the boys that we never before knew. And I think everyone's done an amazing job in researching, writing, editing, creating, coming up with ideas, and really putting together this beginnings of this archive that really is ongoing. It's not finished, it's not finite, it's going to be there to be built on for hopefully years to come.
The core of the archive is made up of over 700 profiles of the boys. We've also written profiles on more than 70 birthplaces the boys originate from, in order to provide a context and a vital link to their lives before the Holocaust.
In conversation with Emily and Rosie, I came up with the idea of having a map that charted the birthplaces of the boys, because I began to notice that many of them had all originally come from the same place, and a way of visualising these clusters of boys who essentially survived together, even if they were separated during the war but then were reunited, was a really nice way to focus the story of the boys, not just on what happened to them during the war, but on people who had full lives before and afterwards, and had been to school with people who also experienced and survived the Holocaust and were then brought to the UK.
As we traced the journeys that the boys had taken from the instability of post-war Europe to their new lives in the UK, we documented the organisations and the key figures who were instrumental in their rescue. We also shine a light on the staff and on the carers who looked after the boys in a wide range of hostels.
My first task was to research all of these hostels, and there were over 40 of them in England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. It ranged from urban houses to country manors, mansions, really rural settings, and just such a range. And some of them were very religious and some of them were less religious. And I just think that contributed towards such a range of experiences for the boys when they first arrived here.
There is kind of a nice testimony from Sam Lasker, who says he remembers that they had a football team and they went and played tennis, they went ice skating, they went to the cinema, and that was kind of what the hostels provided.
The other thing that we were really keen to do was to talk about and discover the story of the people who actually helped the boys, because it tends to be overlooked. People forget the huge efforts that the British community made to accommodate the children, and to discover who and why and what these people were doing, what were their aspirations and what were the challenges that they encountered in their jobs.
Thanks to the efforts of our researchers, we've made a number of significant discoveries. We now know that the boys came to the UK in 5 distinct groups between 1945 and 1948, and that more than 200 of them were girls, and that a significant number of the boys originated from the Carpathian Mountains.
Originally we thought there were only 80 girls as part of the boys, but actually we discovered through lists of names and documents there are actually around 200 girls. So really, there are way more than we thought initially. And I was really keen to give them a bit more of a platform and a bit more of a voice. And again, this is something that we're still just at the beginning of, but we have actually got a separate page on the website called The Girls. And it was just really interesting. So there's a few all-female hostels such as Cazenove Road, Kings Langley, and a few others. And researching into those and speaking to some of the families of the girls was really eye-opening for me.
One of the really interesting things that came out of the research was that just under 300 of the boys came from the Carpathian region. It's not well documented because it happened towards the end of the war. The boys in this story found themselves in ghettos and being deported to Auschwitz in the summer of 1944. In many ways it gave them a better opportunity to survive, but also it was extremely ruthless because they were taken immediately to Auschwitz.
Just to click through the website to look at the boys, the hostels they stayed at, the people who helped them, it creates this kind of really rich, almost tapestry of connections. If you look at, a village in, Poland or Ukraine and look at the destinations of the boys, everyone can learn something.
My hope for the project as a whole and for this film was that people would continue to sit and talk about the boys and share their stories and how remarkable it is that they all came to the UK and built new lives and largely kept in touch as well. And that was one of the most moving things that I took away from working on the project. The connections the boys had before they became the boys and the Holocaust happened continued throughout the rest of their lives, and they remained in each other's lives.
I think it's hard to say what I found most interesting. I think all of it was just incredibly interesting and rewarding as a process. I think what surprised me was how awful these stories were. So many of the survivors had such a positive outlook on their life.
I think this website project has a lot of potential to be part of the future of the 45 Aid Society, because it's going to be a resource that we're going to have with us for many years to come, and hopefully more young people like me can contribute towards it, and it's going to be an ever-growing resource that I'm hoping is going to be at the heart of who we are. The story of the boys, to me, is a really important chapter in the history of the Jewish people, and I think this story is really important for young people to tell, from one young person to another, in our families, in our communities and in our countries.